anybody who comes before the DOJ, for a DOJ in any capacity, better answer the same question. Thank you. On behalf of the chair, I'll give it back to the chair.
Thank you for taking over. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chairman Grassley, and thank you to both of our nominees for your public service, and thank you to your families. I suspect this has been a long day, and it is soon going to come to an end. Mr. Blanche, in particular, thank you for your work in the Southern District of New York and in the Attorney's Office fighting violent crime, and Ms. Slater for your long service at the FTC enforcing our nation's antitrust laws. You've both been nominated to take senior leadership positions in a Department of Justice that I view as being currently in crisis. Career prosecutors have been fired because President Trump didn't like the cases they worked on. Dozens of senior DOJ leaders have been pushed out or reassigned. FBI agents fear mass purges for their work simply because they were assigned to cases related to January 6th, a day, as my colleague, Senator Tillis, was just reminding all of us, when law enforcement officers were brutally attacked, and Attorney General Bondi issued a directive demanding the department go on a witch hunt for past weaponization and calling DOJ attorneys the president's lawyers. As I consider your nominations, I need to know that you will serve with independence and integrity, and I am concerned about some of these recent developments. Ms. Slater, if you would just answer a question I've asked many others, and I understand Mr. Blanche has been asked. Who does the DOJ Antitrust Division work for?
The American people.
Thank you. And do you consider the Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust to be one of the president's lawyers?
No, sir.
Thank you. I think it's important that you both maintain the clarity with which the Attorney General answered this in her confirmation hearing, that you work for the Constitution of the people of the United States, not for any particular president. Mr. Blanche, if you're confirmed and one of the prosecutors comes to you with an airtight case, satisfies burden of proof to take to a jury, but the president asks you to drop that case for reasons unrelated to that investigation, would you?
I mean, Senator,
It's not a hypothetical. We just saw it in the front page this week.
I do believe it's a hypothetical, Senator, and I don't, when you describe a case as, quote, airtight, as a former prosecutor, I don't know what that means.
What was the basis for abandoning the case against the mayor of New York?
I have no idea.
Well, I'll tell you that the press is widely reporting, forgive me, the press is widely reporting that was because he pledged to cooperate with deportation, not because there was concern or question about the foundation of it. If you're asked by the White House to initiate a prosecution that you don't believe is legally justified, would you?
I will follow the law, period. There's no other way to answer that.
And if, in your view, the law does not support the prosecution?
It's not just my view, it's law. So my view is one of many at the Department of Justice, for sure, and I will tell you that I will follow the law. I don't believe what the media says, just as a matter of practice. So to the extent that the media reports something about Mayor Adams or about other things that are happening, I'll wait till I'm there.
True that his prosecution's been dropped, correct?
Pardon me?
The prosecution against him, the case, has been dropped.
What I was referring to is your statement about why it was dropped based on what the media was reporting. I just don't accept that.
Let me move forward. President Trump signed an executive order on Monday pausing prosecutions of individuals accused of bribing foreign government officials. The law that our president unilaterally decided didn't need to be enforced is the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. It's been on the books 50 years. In 2024 alone, DOJ and the SEC brought in more than $1 billion in fines and penalties. Total sanctions over the 50 years since it was enacted, over $30 billion. Does the president have the authority under the Constitution to choose which laws passed by Congress will be enforced or which laws will have their enforcement suspended?
I don't believe that that's what the executive order said, Senator. It directed the Attorney General to pause and to take a look at how investigations were being investigated, how prosecutions were going along, and then to report back to make sure that those investigations and prosecutions are being done in a consistent way with the president's agenda. That's not that's not saying don't follow Congress's directives about laws that have been passed. It's saying, Attorney General, take a pause, figure out what we're doing and why we're doing it, and then we're going to do it the right way.
How long do you believe that pause to be?
I don't know, Senator.
I think it's 180 days. And I think it sends a message about enforcement trajectory and priority. But let me move to another issue that I think is also quite current. Last month, President Trump fired more than a dozen inspectors general. This committee, chairs of both parties, have strongly supported whistleblowers, oversight, and inspectors general. Just yesterday, President Trump fired the IG at USAID right after he published a report saying that funding cuts at AID made it more likely that U.S. funds would be diverted to the hands of terrorist groups. In 2022, Congress passed a law, not a suggestion, not a note, not a piece of whimsy, a statute, a law, saying at least 30 days before the removal of any inspector general, the president must provide Congress with, and I quote, a substantive rationale including detailed and case-specific reasons. President Trump provided no notice to Congress and no justification. You're a lawyer. How many days has the president been in office?
Since January 20th.
Which is how many days fewer than 30?
I'm a lawyer, not a math guy. But
I'll just put it
fewer
this
than
way.
is fewer than 30.
It is a matter of mathematical impossibility for the president to have followed the statute and provided us with the required notice, correct?
I don't
If
know.
he hasn't been president for 30 days, how
Correct.
could he have given us 30 days notice as required by the statute?
He obviously did not.
He obviously did not. Do you think he broke the law by firing these attorneys general, these inspectors general?
As I was saying before, I don't know. I wasn't part of the decisions that he and the White House counsels made in making that decision. I don't want to speak to whether the president broke the law. I just don't know.
But you know that he hasn't been president for 30 days.
Yes.
And I'm telling you that the relevant statute for the removal of any inspector general requires prior notice to Congress with specific reason. Ms. Slater, you're a practicing attorney. Does it seem to you, just on the face of the facts of this instance, that the president broke the law in firing a dozen inspectors general without duly required notice to Congress? The next time we have both of you in front of us, I hope you are familiar. I recognize there are differences of views about exactly what's happened in the past or who made what decisions. But you are in front of us for two of the most important positions in the Department of Justice. And we have, on a bipartisan basis, long stood up for oversight and inspectors general as exactly the people who keep federal agencies on the straight and narrow. And at a moment when there's a whole lot of noise and mess about USAID being corrupt and full of fraud, exactly the person responsible for oversight of AID was just fired yesterday without the required notice or justification to Congress. President Trump broke the law, and I need to hear that you recognize that.
Senator, I'm not going to give you the answer you're looking for then. I refuse to sit here and talk about something that I'm not familiar with and give an answer to you that just because you want it. I'm not going to do that.
Before I call on Senator Blackburn, I'd make a point about the discussion you just had. Number one, the president could abide by the law by putting the person on administrative leave and writing us a letter why he's doing it, and the law would be abided by. The second thing is, if you look at all the corruption that's going on in USAID and all the waste of taxpayers' money, this guy should have been fired. Blackburn. Oh, well, no, before you go, I got one other thing. It's a letter for the record from 70 former Justice Department officials supporting Mr. Blanche's nomination. It reads, in part, Mr. Blanche is a special nominee in that he brings decades of experience both as a prosecutor and defense attorney. As a role of Deputy Attorney General, these experiences have given Mr. Blanche a deep respect for and familiarity with the Department of Justice, rule of law, and the principles of the United States Constitution. Mr. Blanche's experience, professionalism, integrity, and deep expertise make him the perfect candidate for the role. End of quote. I'll put it in the record without objection.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
You correctly argued that the president could have cured this fault by putting them on administrative leave and then giving us the detailed notice.
Yeah.
It's my understanding that is not what happened in this case.
No,
That's
it
why
didn't.
I'm raising it so forcefully.
You're right, it didn't happen. I'm just trying to make the president's job easier. Easy.
And I'm trying to point out that in the case of inspectors general, which we all view as critical and valuable, he did not comply with the law that we wrote.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Blackburn.
I appreciate the recognition, and welcome to each of you. I appreciate the time that you gave me and my office to talk about issues that are so important to all of us and to our nation. And I appreciate that Senator Coons brought up the weaponization of the DOJ. We have lived through 4 years of this. We have watched the DOJ sit quiet. We have watched our colleagues say not a word when they knew Joe Biden was not making the decisions, when they knew full well things that they were parroting were not accurate, when they knew that there were 2 tiers of justice, 2 tiers of access, 2 tiers of treatment, and they said not a word. And so now they are trying to say, oh my goodness, look at what is happening. What is happening to my colleagues? The American people gave a strong vote and a mandate to President Donald Trump to straighten this mess out and end it, and to get this bureaucracy under control. That is why we have DOJ, that the American people are cheering, because they're tired of this. They are tired of paying for a government that is not responsive to the needs of the American people. So yes, indeed, they watched the DOJ be weaponized, show favor to some and disfavor to others, like parents that were going to a PTA or a school board meeting, or going after Catholics who were pro-life. And they are tired of what the Biden administration gave them. So yes, cleaning up, you better believe it. Is it time to clean house? You better believe it. Is cleaning house going to continue? Absolutely, and it should, because the American people voted for that. They want that. They deserve that. And I am pleased that we will have each of you over at the DOJ. Let's stay with this, Mr. Blanche, on the 2 tiers of justice and the weaponization. So there must be bipartisan concern over that. So tell me, what are some things you can do day one to make certain that we end this 2 tiers of justice? I know it is a priority for General Bondi, and I appreciate that she went to work day one on this. So tell me what you do.
I think the first thing I can do is support what the memos that Attorney General Bondi put out on day one. And the biggest issue that has to stop, and it already has stopped, and it can't ever happen again, is outside influence, especially political outside influence, having any role in the decision that the Department of Justice makes to prosecute a case. It just can't. And if it does, then that is not a just prosecution, period.
I appreciate that. I know Senator Lee talked with you about violent crime, and we have seen such an uptick. Part of this is related to the gangs that are coming into the country illegally. We had a raid take place in Nashville yesterday. 8 were indicted. 2 were Agua. This was on human trafficking. And beginning to break apart this ring is so very important. But these soft on crime policies have not served our nation well. In Memphis, we have an issue with violent crime and an uptick that is there. We've had a DA Mulroy over there that just will not prosecute these crimes and bring them forward. So we know that in President Trump's first term, there was a decrease in crime, violent crime, 17%. In the first year of Joe Biden's term, 43%. What a hike. The difference was soft on crime policies. And President Trump had a policy in his first term that federal prosecutors, and I'm going to quote, should charge and pursue the most serious, readily provable offenses. And I think that is something that we need to return to. So will the department return to that policy for their leadership for you and General Bundy?
I believe it already has. Yes, Senator.
Well, and the American people are ready to see it. I think that we have a bunch of security moms all across the country, and they are sick and tired of worried about their kids going to an event or trying to go to shopping or going to school and getting carjacked or mugged when they're out at night. Ms. Slater, I want to come to you. I passed legislation when it was in the House before I came over here, the BOTS Act, and it prohibits ticket scalpers from using software to buy high volumes of tickets. And the FTC sat on their hands on this legislation for 4 years, and they have taken only one enforcement action. Now, to a lot of people, they may say, why are you so worried about ticket scalpers? Well, in Nashville, Tennessee, this is a problem. And we want to make certain that fans are able to get these tickets. And we've also got the Main Event Act that Senator Lujan and I have done, which would strengthen the BOTS Act. But I know that you can't get into some specifics because of the ongoing Ticketmaster lawsuit that you are going to inherit. But I'd love for you to talk about some of the issues that you have observed in the ticketing market and steps that can be taken to clean this up.
Senator, thanks for the question. I know it's a hugely important issue for your state, but for all consumers, frankly.
Yes.
And so I totally acknowledge that. As with many pocketbook issues, we've seen a lot of prices go up and not down in some markets. Regarding the BOTS Act, I have the good fortune to have sitting behind me the chairman of the FTC, Andrew Ferguson, and I can absolutely commit to you that I will be working in close partnership with him, not just on this matter, this legislation, but hopefully all cases across the board, because we do have two antitrust agencies, and so coordination is really important. I would also like to visit with your staff to better understand the issues with the BOTS Act as they might see it.
We just need enforcement. We have had an FTC that chose not to enforce. Thank you. My time's expired.
Yeah, thank you. Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colleagues, I'm going to pick up where Senator Coons left off. Not because I wish to be repetitive, but I think the issue is simply just too important. When the President of the United States violates the law, it's important to call it out. And let me underscore, this isn't when the President of the United States strays from historical norms in how he or she does the job. It's not when the president does different than what's been standard practice for prior presidents. I'm talking about when the President of the United States violates the law. Now, on the issue of inspectors general, in case folks watching at home aren't exactly sure what inspector generals do or what purpose they serve, inspectors general serve to hold executive branch agencies accountable. They work to prevent corruption and to make sure that an agency is spending money as it should be by identifying fraud, waste, and abuse, and so much more. And over the years, Congress has taken steps to ensure the independence of inspectors general. As Senator Coons referenced, it was in 2022 when our chairman, Senator Grassley, worked with Senator Peters in a bipartisan fashion to advance the Securing Inspector General Independence Act, which requires a president to give written notice and reasoning of their decision to dismiss or transfer an inspector general at least 30 days prior. It's been established that President Trump hasn't even been in office for 30 days. Now, Mr. Blanche, when you walked into my office, you repeatedly told me that you will always follow the law your words, quote, full stop. And you've repeated that same message here today. It's numerically, mathematically impossible for President Trump to have abided by the law in dismissing inspectors general. Yes or no?
My answer remains the same. I'm not going to comment on what the decision made by the White House counsel and President Trump and what he did.
I'm not talking about how they reached their decision. And you clearly know this is not a hypothetical. He didn't give Congress 30 days notice. He violated the law, and I'm disappointed that you're failing to acknowledge that. Let me move on. As Senator Blackburn referenced a minute ago in part of her comments, we're concerned about violence in this country. I'm especially concerned about gun violence in this country. As I hope you've learned, the Department of Justice plays a key role in enforcing federal firearm laws, prosecuting gun trafficking, and defending regulations in court. Mexican President Sheinbaum has stated that President Trump agreed to work on reducing the flow of guns into Mexico as part of the recent deal to delay tariffs for a month. As Deputy Attorney General, how do you plan to uphold that commitment?
I think I agree with what the senator said, that it's extremely important to keep guns out of the hands of folks that cannot have them, especially criminals, especially people in armed robbery, drug dealing, murder.
Specific suggestions, ideas, strategies on how to do that.
I mean, I've said this a couple times, empowering our U.S. attorneys, working with state and local law enforcement to make sure that our crime, that when there's crimes committed that belong in federal court, that they go to federal court. If they belong in state court, they go to state court. But it's been done before, all right? And it can be done again.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but am I hearing a commitment to prioritize enforcement against illegal gun sales and trafficking, particularly in light of the rising concern about ghost guns?
Those are all concerns. What I was talking about is violent crime oftentimes used with guns, not always, in our cities. And I think it is extremely important that we focus as much energy as we can on fixing that.
Yeah. And it's not just in cities, by the way. Sadly, I'm not talking about schools.
Agreed.
A lot of school shootings, but in communities, urban, rural, everywhere in between. In my time remaining, a question on a different topic. You know, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have taken issue with us voicing our concern about President Trump filling the top ranks of the Justice Department with his friends, his allies, and personal attorneys. I can only imagine how they would have reacted if a Democratic president installed his own personal criminal defense attorneys as Attorney General, as Deputy Attorney General, as Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General. I know Senator Blumenthal raised questions about conflicts of interest earlier and how you would serve if your understanding of the law differed from what President Trump desired from you and the Department of Justice. This topic came up when now Attorney General Bondi was with us for her confirmation hearing. And when asked what she would do if a conflict of interest arose with respect to her previous representation of President Trump, and in that hearing, she repeatedly said that she would follow Department of Justice protocol. Now, in case you're not familiar, let me share with you that protocol would be to then have the Deputy Attorney General to step into her place. Except if you're confirmed, that wouldn't be the case because you've served President Trump in a personal capacity as well. And your deputy would also be in that conflict scenario. So can you tell me just how far down the line under President Trump's Department of Justice do we have to go until we have someone who isn't conflicted because they served as the president's personal attorney?
Well, respectfully, Senator, I don't agree with the premise that the same conflicts that apply to me will apply to Attorney General Bondi. I don't believe she was ever his personal attorney. I know she represented him in in the past administration. And I agree with what General Bondi said. There are very smart people at the department that will make sure that we are doing the right thing when it comes to recusals. But I don't think it has to go very far down.
Last question. I know my time is just about up. It's a yes or no. Are you aware of any administration history with a similar degree of cascading conflicts of interest, real or perceived?
I don't think there's cascading conflicts of interest in this administration.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Brett, first, just a comment about this business of IGs, because I am in the middle of it. I'd just like to remind people that when I complained about the firing of IGs in the previous administration, I didn't get any help from the Democrats on that. I have a letter in with Senator Durbin in a bipartisan way to try to get some answers on this issue and make the point that the law isn't being abided by. Also, before I call on Senator Brett, I'd like to enter into the record a letter from over 100 alumni of the Southern District of New York who worked alongside Mr. Blanche and know him best. The people who signed this letter, quote, cover the gamut of intellectual, political, and legal ideologies, end of quote, and then further quote, Todd's experience, character, intellect, openness to dialogue, and long-standing love of and belief in the mission of DOJ make him eminently qualified to serve as Deputy Attorney General. As a Southern District AUSA and supervisor, Todd embodied those virtues and understood how essential they are to the administration of justice. Without objection, this will be included. No objection? Go ahead, Senator Brett.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I do want to add to the list of things that Senator Blackburn pointed out that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle failed to point out in the last 4 years. I mean, you had President Biden who said, the Supreme Court, this is a quote, tried to block me from relieving student loan, but they didn't stop me. I'm going to keep going. I just relieved student debt for over 5 million Americans after the Supreme Court had said something totally different. Additionally, we can't forget that at the end of his term, he tried to add an amendment to the U.S. Constitution. So in addition to the list she gave, there are much more examples. Look, I want to turn first to Mrs. Slater and to both of you. Congratulations on your nomination and welcome to your family. I know that y'all are very proud to have them in this position and their willingness to serve the country. Sitting up here, I can tell you it's not just you that serves, it's your entire family. So thank you for your willingness to be a part of this. Ms. Slater, look, I really enjoyed our conversation. I want to touch on an issue that we did discuss in our meeting. As a daughter of 2 small business owners, I constantly look at what's happening in our country and think, how does this affect the little guy? How do we make sure that Main Streets can thrive? And even in a place like our defense community or our shipbuilding community, where it's been declassified that China can build ships at 232 times the speed of America, making sure that our small businesses, our entrepreneurs have an opportunity to thrive and create and innovate, not only living their American dream, but providing such an important pillar of our entire society, I think is really important. I'd like to know, how do you view the Antitrust Division's role with respect to ensuring that these small businesses and entrepreneurs can thrive and compete in today's economy?
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. I really did enjoy visiting with you as well. And thanks for your kind words about families. It's very important. In broad strokes, the role of the Antitrust Division, if done right, is to keep markets competitive. And if we can do that, and if we can play a role in ensuring that, because markets are competitive, the barriers to entry are relatively low, and there's opportunities for small businesses to enter, to scale up if they're online, to expand if they're brick and mortar, then that's a really important function that we can serve in that regard.
Absolutely, and do I have your commitment to continue to look for ways to ensure that those barriers are removed and so people can be a part of the American dream?
Yes, Senator.
Thank you. Mr. Blanche, I'd like to begin with an issue we also discussed and one that I discussed with Attorney General Bondi during her hearing, and that is the Executive Office of Immigration Review. And obviously that oversees our nation's immigration courts and is housed at DOJ. As I mentioned during Attorney General Bondi's hearing, during the Biden administration, the court backlog grew from 1.4 million in FY21 all the way to 3.5 million in FY24. During the Biden administration, there seemed to be a kind of sort of a culture that was fostered of just not completing cases. And I say that because if you look at the numbers from FY21 to FY24, immigration judges failed to adjudicate over 340,000 asylum claims. And I want to put that in perspective for you. If you take the previous 6 fiscal years combined, that is 26 times higher than all of those put together. And so during the first Trump administration, though, what we saw them actually put in kind of a more effective system to look at ways to ensure that we were establishing a metrics-based system for these immigration judges, and that we were actually looking to reduce the abuse of case continuances. It made a difference. Unfortunately, the Biden administration did not continue that. So when you're confirmed, you're going to oversee the day-to-day operations of DOJ, and I would like to know, will you commit to me to looking at this, to taking a look at what is not working, to looking at what the Trump administration did previously and figure out how we can get this back on track?
Of course, absolutely, Senator. Yes.
Thank you. Will you also commit to reevaluating the Biden administration's decision policies that have encouraged the use of this administrative closures of immigration cases and return this EOIR to the posture of actually adjudicating and completing these cases?
Yes, I will work with Attorney General Bondi and for sure look at that, yes.
Excellent. In a similar vein, I wanted to note that I was heartened to see Attorney General Bondi's February 5th memo directing DOJ to the extent allowed by law to end the funding for sanctuary cities that flout our nation's immigration laws. The memo also stated that DOJ will take appropriate legal action to challenge sanctuary jurisdictions, the laws, the policies, and the actions around our country. These sanctuary jurisdictions and their reckless policies undermine the safety of all Americans, and they have no business receiving taxpayer dollars and should be held accountable for their decisions to violate the law. I know that you'll work closely with Attorney General Bondi on this issue, and I just wanted to say thank you, and you have my full support. Lastly, Mr. Blanche, I wanted to raise one more issue that I also raised with Attorney General Bondi, but I think it's really important. I, along with my colleagues here on both sides of the aisle, I'm sure, have experienced DOJ's total lack of responsiveness when it comes to congressional oversight in recent years. In my case, I had a letter to Attorney General Garland regarding the failure to enforce 18 U.S.C. Section 1507 at the home of our Supreme Court justices, and it went unanswered for over a year. As you remember, after the leaked Dobbs decision, they allowed them to picket and parade, which 1507 says you absolutely cannot do with the intent to influence an outcome. When I finally did receive a response, it didn't even include any actual answers to the questions I raised, and in fact, it didn't even attempt to answer them. We had slides from where the U.S. Marshals were actually directed to and encouraged, actively discouraged, of making arrest. And so will you commit to me that DOJ, under the new leadership, won't follow this same pattern over the last 4 years and will instead work to be responsive to congressional oversight and efficiency in a timely manner and get to the bottom of what happened and why Section 1507 was not followed by in the way that it should have been?
Yes, I commit to that.
Okay. Senator Welch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank both of the nominees, and I'll start, Ms. Slater, with you, and then speak with you, Mr. Blanche, if that's okay. Ms. Slater, first of all, Julie Brill, who is a great Vermonter, was an FTC commissioner, thinks you're great. I think Julie Brill is great, so you've got something going for you, okay? Inflation is just a wicked challenge for everyday Vermonters trying to pay their bills. And it popped again today. twice as high as last month. My view is that the role that you would play would have a major impact on whether we can deal with the market consolidation that is allowing entities to have enormous amount of pricing power and abusing that pricing power at the expense of folks that all of us represent. So I just want to ask you a few questions about that. Healthcare, incredibly expensive. Private equity is now getting in healthcare, not to deliver services, but to monetize the profit, take it for shareholders, and not reinvest it in the healthcare system. I'm going to give an example. Stewart Healthcare in Massachusetts is a Catholic health care system with 6 hospitals. Private equity purchased Stewart in 2010. They bought it for the real estate, and they ran it into the ground. It goes out of business, and moms who thought they had an appointment to take care of their sick child suddenly found out the hospital's closed. And those guys got out of town. Stewart just wrecked it. That's my view. What's the role of private equity in healthcare when they don't reinvest? They just squeeze and turn it into a real estate play and then leave high and dry a lot of folks in rural areas who want to get healthcare.
Thanks, Senator. I agree with you that healthcare markets are crucial markets for an antitrust standpoint. And I do commit to keeping a close eye to the extent that the DOJ has jurisdiction.
Please do that. We've got to have the healthcare system be about healthcare, not enriching Wall Street, all right? Ag, that's a big deal for us in Vermont. We got farmers. They love nothing more than working the land to try to feed Vermonters and feed Americans. Incredible consolidation. 6 grocery store chains have 65%, 83% of milk sales with 3 companies, poultry at 60%. For beef, it's between 80 and 85%. Do you see the consolidation in the agriculture industry and the food processing industry as something that is a factor in increasing prices so that people have sticker shock when they check out at the grocery line?
Well, there are many variables that go into pricing, but competition or lack of competition is certainly one of them.
All right, so you'll stay on that. I appreciate that. Mr. Blanche, look, you're a qualified guy. I am amazed at your story. You started out with nothing. You didn't go to the Ivy League schools, and you ended up with this extraordinary career at major law firms who in years past would have never looked at a guy like you, and I know your wife helped you a lot, so there's so much to admire. And by the way, I was a public defender. I defended bad people. I got assigned to those cases, and I assume that you respect the fact that I took the assignment.
Absolutely.
It would never hold it against a public defender that they were defending in the court of law a person who was accused of a serious crime, right?
I would not.
Right. And my view on the FBI is it's the same thing. I support the FBI. I so admire those folks, the men and women. And if an FBI agent, I'm a worker there, and I get assigned to a case by my boss, is there any reason in the world that I should pay a price because I did my job as assigned?
No, and I don't think that that's what's happening. I'm not there. I see the same memos, read the same articles, but I don't think that that's what's happening.
I know you weren't there, but let me just ask you, we have got to stand up for those folks. And you're going to have a major job. And my hope, I don't want to get in an argument, I respect you a lot, but my hope is you're going to defend the men and women at the FBI who just did their job.
The men and women of the FBI that just did their job? Of course, absolutely.
All right, and getting assigned to a case is one. Another thing, you were in the Southern District. You know, I was a young lawyer, and I remember looking around for jobs. I worked for, I noticed some of the places you worked, kind of fancy. But there's nothing better than the Southern District, right? That's the crown jewel of the federal prosecution, right? And hasn't it been the tradition in the Southern District, and actually in the whole U.S. attorney system, that there's independence in those local offices? You know, there's a chain of command, but there's a lot of independence, correct?
Well, I agree with what you said. There's a chain of command and there is independence, yes.
All right. So what I just saw with the dismissal of the Adams charge, that was directed by D.C., correct? This is Mayor Adams.
I have the same information you have. It appears it was, yes.
That's right.
I don't know, beyond what I've publicly
See, this
reported.
is the concern that all of us have. We're hearing from our colleagues about weaponization, and we heard from you in the experience you had with President Trump. On our side, it's like an effort to erase something that really happened. That was January 6th. And the apprehension that a lot of us have is that the issue here of lawfare and weaponization is just still continuing, where you have the president saying, my Justice Department, and he's telling this basically through his agents, telling, let's dismiss the corruption charge against the mayor of New York City. So I just want to put that out there to let you know there's good faith concern here on both sides about this use of the term weaponization and the use of the term lawfare. And I don't know if I have time, Mr. Chairman, for one other question. Mr. Chairman, I just didn't know if I had time for one more question. I just wanted to ask Mr. Blanche, when he goes on that triathlon, I guess you went with you and your father-in-law?
No, my daddy's right there.
Your father? All right. The next
It was a full Ironman, Senator.
All right. The next time you go, the only person up on the dais who can join you is Senator Grassley. I yield back.
Fair enough.
In the great movie Casablanca, we encounter the phrase, I'm shocked to find gambling here. I have to say, sitting through this hearing and listening to our Democrat colleagues, I'm shocked that anyone would think there was weaponization at the Department of Justice or the FBI. It makes me wonder where my Democrat colleagues have been the last 4 years. In over 200 years of our nation's history, we've had 47 presidents. Mr. Blanche, of those 47 presidents, how many not named Donald John Trump have been indicted?
0.
How many presidents not named Donald Trump have been prosecuted?
0.
How many not named Donald J. Trump have had FBI agents arrive at their home and rifle through their home?
0.
Throughout 4 years of the brazen weaponization of the Department of Justice and the FBI, Senate Democrats sat by meekly and mutely. Understand, President Trump wasn't indicted once, he wasn't indicted twice, he wasn't indicted 3 times, 4 separate times by partisan Democrat prosecutors who were terrified that the American people would vote to reelect him. You heard just a minute ago my friend from Vermont ask you to defend the good men and women of the FBI. I agree, you should defend the good men and women of the FBI, and I'll tell you, I've heard from FBI agents who are horrified at an institution that had built a reputation for integrity being cheapened by being turned into a political weapon to attack the opposition of the Democrat White House. The single biggest thing, Mr. Blanche, you can do to protect the good men and women of the FBI is to restore integrity to the FBI and end the weaponization that has caused half of the country to no longer trust what used to be the premier law enforcement agency in the world. For 4 years, we saw the Biden Justice Department happily weaponize that agency to go after their political opponents. We saw Mark Houck, a pro-life protester who faced a pro-abortion protester who screamed and shoved his son, and he pushed the man back. In response for pushing a man back who had screamed at his 12-year-old son, the Biden Department of Justice and FBI sent an army of FBI agents at the crack of dawn to his house, machine guns drawn, to arrest him in front of his 7 kids. Mr. Houck had, by the way, offered, through his counsel, to turn himself in. In your many years as a prosecutor, have you ever sent an army of FBI agents to arrest someone who's offered to turn themselves in peacefully?
No.
And yet no one at the Department of Justice seemed troubled by that. They happily authorized that. And not a single Democrat on this committee, to the best of my knowledge, has ever asked one damn question about it. When the National Association of School Boards sent a letter to Joe Biden complaining that parents were unhappy by their radical policies that were happening to children, within days, the White House sent that to the Department of Justice, and days later, the Attorney General sent a formal memo to the FBI saying, target parents. I want you to go after parents who are exercising their First Amendment rights. And we've had moms and dads all over the country who've had the G-men come knocking on their door because they had the temerity to exercise free speech. Is targeting moms and dads who go to school boards and engage in peaceful speech, is that a permissible use of law enforcement?
Not in my view, Senator.
You know, if you look at this election, there are a number of issues on which there is a clear and unmistakable mandate. There's an unmistakable mandate to secure the border. Because for 4 years, Joe Biden and the Democrats defied the law. Federal immigration law is clear. Illegal immigrants who are apprehended shall be detained and shall be deported. Mr. Blanche, when the law uses the word shall, is that typically mandatory?
It is.
And what Joe Biden did is something no president in the history of our country has ever done. He refused to follow the law, released millions of illegal immigrants into America. He released murderers. He released rapists. He released child predators. He released Venezuelan gang members. If Joe Biden and the Democrats had been willing to follow the law, Laken Riley would still be alive instead of being murdered by a criminal illegal alien released by Joe Biden and the Democrats. If Joe Biden and the Democrats had followed the law, Jocelyn Nungary in my hometown of Houston, beautiful 12-year-old girl, raped and murdered by 2 illegal immigrants, Venezuelan gang members, Joe Biden had in custody and released. No president has ever done what Joe Biden and the Democrats did. And by the way, not a one of my Democrat colleagues, to the best of my recollection, ever asked one question about why the Department of Justice was refusing to follow the law. Mr. Blanche, is the Department of Justice doing its job if it refuses to follow the law and defies federal immigration law?
Not in my view, it is not.
We have a clear and unmistakable mandate to the voters. We will secure the border. We will stop releasing criminals and rapists and child molesters into our community. And there is a clear mandate. We will end the weaponization of the Department of Justice and the FBI. Does this committee have your commitment that you will be faithful to the law, to the Constitution, and you will bring integrity back to the Department of Justice?
Absolutely.
One final question, Mrs. Slater. You and I have talked about how I think the single biggest threat to free speech is big tech censorship. Please give this committee your views on the relevance of antitrust law to stopping big tech censorship, silencing the free speech of American people, and what are the conceivable array of tools and arrays of remedies under the antitrust laws?
Well, thank you, Senator. We did indeed talk about this. And I think we also agree that there are other tools available beyond antitrust. But what we agreed in principle is that in markets that are highly concentrated, conservative viewpoints or anybody's viewpoint can be quickly throttled or suppressed when there is market power on back of that. Someone can be disappeared from the internet quite easily. When there are only 2 platforms providing news, for example, to the American people.
And so the remedies are potential remedies?
Well, as with any antitrust enforcement matter, it's up to us to put together a case, bring it before the courts, and then we can have a remedies discussion. It goes before a judge in the case of the DOJ.
Thank you.
Senator Schiff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to you both. Mr. Blanche, you and I have some common friends from your time in the Southern District of New York who speak highly of you. I take issue with my colleague, Senator Welch, in saying that SDNY is the flagship. Clearly, it's the Central District of California. But notwithstanding what I've heard from our mutual friends, I am gravely concerned in listening to your testimony, the degree to which you sound like you're still representing Donald Trump as his lawyer. Your criticism of the department, for example, filing a superseding indictment in the January 6th prosecution after a Supreme Court case so that the indictment would conform with that opinion, is the kind of objection I would expect to hear from a criminal defense lawyer, not the kind of statement I would expect to hear from a deputy attorney general. So let me just ask you, you have not been confirmed yet. Are you still Donald Trump's lawyer?
I mean, yes, my attorney-client relationship with President Trump remains. Yes, the cases I was representing him on, to the extent that there's anything going on, like the appeal in Manhattan, I'm not part of that.
But you're still representing him as you sit here today.
Well, I mean, representing him, there's no active matters. So
Correct, but you're still his lawyer.
I have an attorney-client relationship with President Trump.
And even if you're confirmed and you're no longer representing him as a criminal defendant, even then you still have continuing moral obligations as a member of the bar, legal obligations, to your former client, correct?
Like everybody at the Department of Justice with every one of their former clients.
Correct. So you'd have a continuing duty of loyalty and confidentiality when it comes to his communications, correct?
Yes.
Now, Ms. Bondi, as Attorney General, one of her first acts, established the Orwellian-sounding weaponization working group. In her memo, it says that the work of this weaponization group will be supported by the Office of the Deputy Attorney General. That is the office that you will occupy. Would you agree that it would be a blatant conflict of interest as his criminal defense lawyer, as someone who has a continuing legal obligation to him as a former client, for you to participate in any of the work of that group as it pertains to the January 6th case that you represented him, or the Mar-a-Lago case where you represent him, or Alvin Bragg's office where you represent him? You would agree that that would be a very blatant conflict of interest?
I don't necessarily agree with that. There will be a conflict of interest potentially, but I quibble with the word blatant. And it depends on,
okay.
I mean,
take out the word blatant, but isn't it a clear conflict of interest? You've represented him in these cases. You acknowledge you still have a continuing obligation to him in these cases. How could you possibly oversee an investigation or review of the prosecutors in these cases when you handled them? How is that not the most obvious conflict of interest?
I am not saying I can or I cannot. I'm saying I'm not going to say to you today, Senator, yes, there's a blatant conflict of interest.
Well, why?
I don't know what the work is.
Well, can't you acknowledge that if you're asked to supervise cases involving your own cases, that would be a conflict of interest?
That's a very different hypothetical. Certainly.
No, it's not hypothetical. You're subject to the order of the Attorney General now to support that working group. That working group is going to look at the January 6 cases and the Mar-a-Lago case, the cases you worked on. So can you acknowledge it would be a conflict for you to oversee that work?
What I'm not acknowledging is the broad strokes you're giving it. That work, for example. There will be conflicts, and I will not violate my ethical obligations.
Well, let me just ask you with great specificity, will you recuse yourself from overseeing the January 6th case, the Mar-a-Lago case, and the Alvin Bragg case? Will you recuse yourself from the working group's supervision of those investigations?
I will follow the rules as told to me by the experts, career prosecutors in the department when it comes to every recusal.
I've heard that.
But it's true.
Well, it may be true in the abstract.
No, it's not abstract. It's true.
Well, here's the thing, Mr. Blanche, which you well know. You may very well get some opinion of an ethics lawyer appointed by the administration to tell you that you can exercise your discretion. If you believe it's a conflict, you can say you won't participate. If you don't, you can participate. So you may have discretion. So I'm asking you, how will you exercise that discretion? Will you recuse yourself from overseeing an investigation into matters where you are his lawyer? That shouldn't be hard.
You just gave a purely hypothetical because the
this is not hypothetical. This is in black and white. It says, and I will read it, I hereby establish the Weaponization Working Group, which will be led by the Office of the Attorney General and supported by the Office of the Deputy Attorney General. So this is what you're going to be asked to do. If you are given the discretion of overseeing cases in which you are his lawyer, will you recuse yourself?
It depends. The hypothetical you just described said that a career ethics attorney tells me I do not have to recuse for whatever reason. Because again, we are talking about hypotheticals. If the career Justice Department attorney says to me, you do not have to recuse yourself, I'm not going to sit here today and say that I will still say I will recuse myself.
I mean, that answers my question. You don't think it's a conflict of interest sufficient that you would sitting here today, tell me that you were.
I said.
Yeah, no, I get it. I find it remarkable where we are.
Well, you're restating something I didn't say, Senator.
No, I find it remarkable that you feel there's any world in which you could somehow participate in an investigation of people where you represented the president in that same investigation.
I didn't say that.
Well, you're not willing to commit to recusal, so that means you're willing to entertain supervising that work. So that tells me something. But let me move on because I think you've made your position clear. Let me ask you very specifically about the Mar-a-Lago case. The Justice Department formally had recommended Volume 2 be made public. Do you support Volume 2 of the report being made public?
No.
Okay. Do you commit to preserving the evidence in both those investigations?
I commit for sure to following the law and following the rules.
But you won't commit to preserving the evidence. Let's say you have the discretion about destroying the evidence. Do you commit today to preserving the evidence in both those cases?
I commit to following the law.
Okay. And if you can't commit to preserving the evidence in those cases in which you were the defense lawyer, I think, again, that speaks to the conflict of interest that you have as the president's defense lawyer.
I did not commit to it. I said I would follow the law.
No,
I'm not sure what.
Mr. Blanche, I understand everybody's going to say generically they'll follow the law. But I've asked you a simple question about whether you will preserve evidence, and you can't say yes.
No.
You can't say yes.
I hope every single DOJ attorney, political, career, or anybody, would say they would follow the rules as a
And I would hope that any DOJ attorney will say, I will always preserve evidence. There's no circumstance in which I will destroy evidence. That's what I would hope. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Schiff. Do you want to say what you were trying to say, or do you want me to move on?
You can move on, Senator. Thank you.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to enter into the record an article by Congressman Jim Jordan, wrote for the Daily Wire yesterday. The article's titled, Why Todd Blanche is the Right Man for Deputy Attorney General. Then I want to say that for everybody's information, written questions can be submitted for the record until 5 p.m. tomorrow. And so for both of you, it's very important that you get these answered quickly and return them, because until you do, we can't schedule the 5 days ahead of time that we need to consider your nomination. So if you do that, I think that you folks have done a very good job, and I think if you're confirmed, you'll carry out the responsibilities in the non-political way you should. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.